Real estate investment practice problem using Excel. Adjustable rate mortgage or ARM with no caps, part 1. Get ready because we're raising the stakes with real estate. Here we are in our Excel worksheet. If you have access to the Excel worksheet, would like to follow along, note that we have 3 tabs on down below: the example tab, practice tab, and blank tab. Let's take a look at them now, starting with the example tab, in essence being an answer key. Although we're focused in on the ARM, we're first going to take a look at a standard fixed 30-year to compare and contrast the ARM to. Then we'll put together our information with relation to the ARM in the format of a table, put together a graph so we can understand it a little bit better. We will then create our amortization table. We'll then put together our pivot table, and then finally analyze the ARM information to be able to compare and contrast it with some of our tools, including the internal rate of return, the IRR. This will take a few presentations in order to do. The second tab is going to have some of this information in blue, pre-formatted, so you just need to go in and populate it, and you could do so along with instructional videos if you so choose. The third tab, which is the one we will be working in on, we'll have just the data on the left-hand side, and then we'll populate this and construct it from scratch. We'll just have one little scratch, and then we'll make everything out of that one scratch. So here we have it. Here's the scratch that we got. We've got the home information. We're going to say 100,000. We're not going to put anything down here because we're just focused in on, in essence, the loan, that in essence being the starting point, the 100,000. We'll start off with just the 30-year, 360 periods. That's 30 times 12. We're going to have the 10% at the rate. And so notice you can apply the same concepts depending on what the rate is for your particular circumstances at any particular time. So we're going to say it's flat this time at just say the 10%, and then we'll calculate what our payments will be on down below, and then we'll compare that to the difference or change when we look at the ARM. So the standard payment calculation based on this information up top for a fixed rate loan would simply be, I like to say negative, and then PMT to flip the signs to get a positive number, and brackets. We're going to take up the rate. Now I'm going to do this fairly quick because we've seen this in the past. This is our baseline kind of calculation. We got the rate up top, 10%. That's the yearly rate. We're going to divide that by 12 to get the monthly rate, comma, the number of periods would be 30 times 12, or we've already done that, picking up the 360 months, then comma, the present value would be the amount of the loan, the 100,000, and enter. There's going to be our payments. If we construct our amortization table, which once again I'm going to do quite quickly because we've seen this in the past, if you want to construct a standard straight 30-year amortization table more slowly, take a look at prior presentations. I've already got the headers up top: years, months, payments, interest, loan balance, this is loan reduction and loan balance. I'm going to add the months first because it's going to be in months, 360 of them. So I'm going to say 0, 1, 2, selecting those 3 tabs, dragging that on down for that series of numbers to get down to 360. So we'll get down to 36D, and then center that by going to the alignment group and center. Going to do a little bit of a fancy formula in order to pick up the amount for the years. It's going to be the round down, so it equals the round down. So I'm going to round it down, and then brackets, we're going to pick up that 12 on down below. So I'm going to pick up the 12, and then I'm going to divide it by the number of months, or 12, and then we need the comma. Hold on a sec. Round down, I'm missing an N. Round down, then we're going to pick up the 12 divided by 12, comma, the number of digits is going to be 0. And there it is. So there's our round down, enter. That's going to allow us to use this formula to drag it all down. If I drag it down to 13 places, then you see it starts at 2 down there. So it looks like it's populating properly. This puts us a year on each row, which is useful and relevant and necessary if you want to use things like slicers or pivot tables. I'm going to copy this all the way down. There's a little bit of trick on the last couple ones, as we recall. These last ones don't have anything to recall down below, so I'm going to just shore up these last few by saying equals the one above it. And then I'll just copy that down, so that'll give us our 30 all the way down there. Scrolling on back up, so now we've got our years have been in place. Let's go ahead and center that, I'm going to pick up the balance. I'll put a 0 here for year 0. We'll pick up the loan balance starting at, this will be equal to then the starting point of the 100,000. The payments are going to be equal to the payment calculation we have down below. This is going to be the same payment all the way through. Therefore, F4 on the keyboard, because I'm outside of my data set. I want to copy it all the way down. Enter. Putting my cursor back on it, putting my cursor on the fill handle, and just double click payments all the way down. I'm just going to keep them without the pennies here so they are rounded. Interest calculation is going to be equal to the loan balance times the rate, which is 10%, but that's the yearly rate. We need the monthly rate, so we're going to take that and divide it. Actually, before I do that, we need to select F4 on the keyboard because that's outside of our table. That's the yearly rate. We need the monthly rate, so I'm going to divide it by 12 to give us the monthly amount. And there we have it. So we're going to say enter. So there's the interest. This equals the payment minus the interest. That's the loan reduction. And that means the loan balance is going to equal the 100,000 minus the 44. There's the 99956. If I select those 3 cells, double click on the fill handle, it should drag it all the way down. We could double check that this thing is in balance by going to the bottom of it, and we can see then we got a 0 at the bottom. So that's our standard kind of table. Now we want to say, okay, once I have that amortization table, what differences will happen when we apply the ARM to it? So we'll want to keep the ARM and look at it in terms of a calculation, and then also think about it in terms of the whole, amortization table. I think that'll give us a better grasp of it and have our comparison. I'm going to add in a chart here. Go into the insert, putting my cursor somewhere in the table, and then I like to make a table out of it, which is in the insert tab, tables. Just make a table. Selects the whole thing. It should pick the whole thing as long as you're somewhere in it, not selecting more than one cell, and okay, there's our table. I'm going to hit the drop down and just make it like a blank one with just those items. And then we could put select the whole thing on the way down and maybe put some borders in it, and go to the insert tab and just put some standard font group, borderize it. And then I'll squish up some of the columns up top, squishing them up like that. So we'll squish them. That's too squishy. They're too close together. I don't want them to get uncomfortable. And then we're going to go down, and then you could add like a total column down below by going to the table designs, totals. And I don't want to total this one up. I want to total like this column. I'd like to sum that up. I'd like to sum this one up, and possibly that one as well. So there's our sums, there's our totals. Okay, so that's going to be our starting point. Now I'd like to copy this whole thing over, and let's see what will happen when we change it for like an ARM. So I'm not going to copy the amortization table yet, but just the data. So that we'll copy the data, and then we'll get the amortization table in a bit. I'm going to copy from A to B. Let's go on over to C to get that little cell there as well, that little column, the skinny column. Right-click on it, and then we're going to copy that. Right-click and copy. I'm going to put it not in column J, but column K, because I don't want it right next to my other stuff. Control-V or paste. Going to make column J a little bit smaller. And so there we have our data. Now, I'm going to make some adjustments so that we can think about what would happen with regards to an ARM. And when we think about the ARM, we don't have that fixed rate. Of course, that's going to be part of the problem. We have the adjustable rate. The adjustable rate then is going to be tied typically to some kind of index. So the index is something that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So we can kind of predict what's going to happen. You could think about calculating your ARMs as if you're basically making your best predictions of what you believe are going to happen in the future. You can then run multiple scenarios if you want to, possibly using like a Monte Carlo, some kind of multiple scenarios to see the best and the worst and what you think will most likely happen in the future. And or you can think of it as time has passed and the index has passed, then what's going to happen to our payments as time goes. So those are the two mindsets that you want. When you're going into the ARM up front, you're making projections into the future. You don't know what the future interest rates will be. All you know, they're going to be tied to an interest rate. You can then make your projections on what you think will happen, what the possibilities will be, what kind of risk are you taking on given the fact that the rates are adjustable, and then you can make your predictions and or looking at it from the standpoint as after time has passed, and we know what the rates are, what has actually happened to the interest rates and therefore to our loan related to it, given the fact that it's adjustable. All right, we're going to build a little table here first. So the table is going to say years. We're going to say index. Now the index is what we're going to tie the rate to. So that's typically going to be the case when you're talking about an ARM. The index is going to be an indexed rate, and then the adjustable rate will typically say that it's going to be some deviation from basically the index rate. It's going to be the index rate plus something in terms of getting to the ARM for the ARM portion of it, or the rate that's going to be used on the loan. So that'll be the general idea. So we got the index, we got the rate, we've got the payment, and then the balance. Now notice you could also have some caps on these, which we'll talk about in the future. I'm not going to put the caps on yet so that we can think about this just without them at this point in time, and then we'll add that level of complexity. So we're going to then go to the Home tab. We're going to go to the font group. We'll make this black and white for our headers. Let's center it as well. The data on the left-hand side, we're going to say the loan is still for that $100,000. We've got a 30-year or 360 period, but we're going to say this is now going to be the initial rate. The initial rate is also often given like some kind of teaser rate, which will often be lower than the rates after that point in time. So it might even have a deviation from the index plus some kind of margin, right? They might give a lower rate up front. Be careful of that, because that's a selling point. It's kind of a little manipulative a little bit to give a low rate up front. But in any case, that's how it usually works. And then we're going to say that we've got the margin. Now the margin is what's typically going to be after year one. We're going to say here the difference between the index rate and the rate that we are given. So whatever the baseline index is plus whatever, in our case, we're going to say 2, the margin will be our rate unless there's any other cap of some kind that would be restricting that. So we're going to say that's going to be that. We won't deal with any points, but you could have a similar situation with points and whatnot with regards to an ARM loan and so on. But we'll keep it at that. Now, if we were to see the normal payment calculation that we did down here based on this rate, this would be the amount of the payment for the life of the loan. But obviously, we're saying that this is going to change based on the index. We're going to apply the index to be changing on a year-by-year basis. Now, you could apply the index to change in different ways. What's going to basically happen is the rate is going to be reset periodically. Now, and they could alter how often it's going to be reset, but yearly would be somewhat common, right? We're going to say that every year we're going to look at the index rate and we're going to reset the rate in accordance with the index rate plus 2%, whatever that index rate is. Now, the index rate could go up or down, just depends on the market as to what's going to happen with the index rate. And whatever happens to the index rate, we're going to have plus 2% of the index rate. So it could be a benefit, right? In the future, the index rate could go down, and that could be good. But obviously, the risk involved is the index rate goes up. And the thing that we want to be most careful of is especially if you're in a situation where you're doing like short flipping kind of situation, then the bad scenario here would be, well, what happens if the home housing market crashes, goes down, and then the value of the home possibly goes lower even than the loan cost, and you've got the rate going up because you're in also a time of inflation, and you get locked in, you get kind of stuck in that point. That's going to be obviously the risk that you want to mitigate in this type of scenario. But the index could potentially go up and down. It could be in your favor. It's just the level of risk versus the potential reward that are in place, and they can be significant. So we're going to say then this is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to take this out to 5 years. I'm going to center this, alignment and center. Then we got to adjust, say, what the index is going to be starting in year 2. Note that year 1 is, in essence, not based on that index because they're giving us that initial teaser rate, which might be less than the index plus the margin. And so we're going to say that rate is what it is. It's going to be just the 8% and not going to be tied to the index. Now I'm going to make these two columns a percent column, selecting this column, home tab number group, making that a percent, add a couple decimals to it. So then we'll assume what the index is going to be. And now here's where the estimates come from. Like if you were starting the loan, then you can project out what you think is going to happen, say in year 2, 3, and 4, and then try to project out what your costs will be in that time. So for example, if you expect to only have the home for 5 years or something like that, you could try to run projections, and you could try to run projections in different ways to try to determine, what's the probability of a good scenario or a bad scenario. You can look at a worst case scenario, best case scenario kind of thing. You could try to do some type of averaging to what you think would be the most likely scenario to take place, and help that, use that to make your decision-making process, trying to factor in the risk versus reward when you make your decisions. Or you can think about this index as after time has passed, then we would know what actually happened and we can see what would happen after that point in time. So either way you want to do it, let's think about it as basically a projection at this time. We're going to think that in year 2, we're going to assume it goes to 10%, and then we're going to say it goes to 13%, 15%, and then it goes back down to 10%. Note that the index, there's nothing saying that the index is always going to increase or anything like that. It depends on whether you're in a period of basically inflation or not, right? Is inflation going up or is it going down? And so it depends on the market, typically the index reflecting what is happening in that case. So now we're going to just say, okay, then the rate, we don't have any caps that are involved at this point in time. So we're simply going to say that the rate is just going to be the indexed amount plus 2%. So now we're just going to say this is just going to be the 10% plus the 2%. This 2% is outside of our table. So if I wanted to copy it down, I'd say F4 on the keyboard, $ before the L and the 8. I won't do it yet, but just to show you, then we're going to say this one's going to be the 13 plus the 2%. Something happened here. I think I said times the 2% plus the 2%. So that would be 10 goes to 12, 13 goes to 15. This would be 15 plus the 2%, which would go to 17. This would be the 10 plus the 2% goes to 12%. So that's going to be our general kind of comparison between the two. If I wanted to copy that rate cell down as quickly as possible, we can do it this way, deleting the cell. I'm going to make this absolute. So I'm going to say it's 04 plus the L8, and I'm going to make that absolute F4 on the keyboard, $ before the L and 8. Then we can put our cursor on that cell and copy it down. And there we have our rates. So you can see kind of the comparison between the index and the rate on the actual rate that we will be paying. You can make a little graph out of that, which might make it a little bit easier to think about. If I select these cells, for example, let's take it from up here, and then we go to the insert up top, and I'm going to go into the charts, and I would like to see what they recommend. Let's give us the recommended charts, and hopefully they give us what we're looking for. I'm looking for something like that, right? Something like that. That's the one. So I'm going to say okay. And you'll see that if there's no caps involved, I'm just going to delete the title up here. We got this nice chart that's basically, let's make this a little smaller. A little smaller. Okay. Right, so then we have at period 1, we got the 8%, and then at period 2, we've got the 12%, the 10% on the index, and then you get this gap, which is a 2% gap along the way, the rate that we're paying versus the index. So we're of course mapping out or following the index for our payments. Now that might deviate a little bit if we get into caps, which we'll talk about in future presentations, but that's, the general idea. Obviously the index can do whatever it might do. So we might have another projection where the index just keeps going up. We might have a worst case scenario where the increase rises greatly. We might have a best case scenario where the index goes down. And again, we want to kind of average those out some way when we're making this kind of decision. That's typically how these kinds of decisions would be made. You might try to map out, the best and worst case scenarios, the likelihood that they're going to happen, and take some kind of average to give you an idea of what's going to happen and whether or not that would be a beneficial decision for you to be making. Also note that when we do talk about the caps, then that is a way to shorten the risk in the midterm, in the short term, so that you have less, meaning you could say, well, the rate's only going to go up, can only go up by so much per period. And if that's the case, then the worst case scenario is limited, at least for that number of periods. But again, if you end up in a long shot of increase in the index, then it's going to still be a problem over time. And again, most people, when they are looking at this type of scenario, they're not expecting the home value to, in essence, go down substantially. And it can happen. We've obviously seen it happen. Home values can drop. And if the home value drops and we're stuck in a period of inflation, then that's when, trouble could happen. You want to take that into consideration in your analyses. Then we're going to take our payment calculation. We'll take our payment calculation based on these rates now. Now, the tricky thing with the payment calculation is this one is happening for the entire loan, for in essence the 30 years. This one's happening for the 30 years minus 1 year. So we're going to do a little bit of a tricky calculation for our payment, which will look a little bit different, so we can take into consideration the fact that there's less periods as we calculate the loan. We're not just calculating one 30-year payment amount. All right, so the first one is going to be the PMT Shift 9. The rate is going to be that 8%. That's a yearly rate because we always work in yearly rates. So I'm going to divide it by 12 because we're actually doing months here, comma, the number of periods. Now, this is where the kind of tricky thing is. I'm going to put brackets. Instead of just saying 360 periods, I'm going to try to take it in terms of years, which is 30 years right there. I want to select F4 on the keyboard to make that absolute. So when I copy it down, it will copy down because that's outside the table. And then I want to tie it to my number of years on the left-hand side so I can copy this formula down easily, even though I'll do it multiple times just so we can practice. But we would then say that minus the 1 here, and that would give us 29 years. And then I'm going to say plus 1, just typing in 1 in brackets. Now, why would I do this minus 1 plus 1? Well, when I go down to year 2, it's going to be 2 minus, it'll be 2 minus the 2 plus 1, which will give us 29 years. So that looks a little funny to do it that way, but you can see the reason we're doing it that way is because we're copying it down. So in essence, we're talking about 30 years, but we're calculating it 30 minus 1 plus 1 so we can copy it down. Now, really, we're not talking about years. We're talking about months. We need 360 involved. So we're going to take the number of years and simply multiply it then times the number of months in a year, which are going to be 12. So that's the biggest kind of weirdness in our calculation there. And then we're going to say, comma, the present value is going to be the balance. Now we got the balance over here in the loan amount, the 100,000. I'm going to move the balance over here into the balance up top so I can copy it down. So if I took that 100,000 there, and then I didn't close it up with the last bracket, so I'm going to say, okay, close it up for me. We get the 734. I'm going to add some decimals here. I'm going to go here and go say number group, add a couple decimals, so 733.76. Now I'd like to bring the balance over here, so I'm going to bring the balance over here, and then I'm going to adjust that last component so I can copy it down. Instead of taking it from my table to the left, I'll take it from the balance up top. So I'm going to take that last one and I'm going to adjust it to taking the balance. You can't really see it that well. Double click on it. We're taking that last piece, putting the cursor down. I want to pick that amount in R2. It looks like R2 and enter. So there we have it. I'd also like to flip the sign. I'm going to double click on it again and let's make it a negative. I like to just do that by putting a negative in front of the P. You can also put it in front of the R2 if you so choose. So there it is. So there we have it. Now, calculating the ending balance is also a bit of a trick to do that. So now, in order to get this, we also need to calculate basically the ending balance here so that we can calculate the payment for the next item. And that's a little bit tricky. We will do that in a couple different ways. I want to do that one with an amortization table because I think that's more intuitive to see, and that's how we've been doing it in the past. And then 2, we can do a calculation to figure that ending balance as well. So we're going to stop here. We're going to continue on with that next time. Next time, we'll do it with the method of the amortization table to pick up the ending balances. And then we'll do it again with basically our formulas.